Vacancy rates aren't just numbers, they're the pulse of your rental market. Ignore them and you're gambling with your cash flow. But understanding vacancy rates helps you set competitive rents, reduce turnover, and maximize your investment returns. Set your rent too high and your unit sits empty. Too low and you leave money on the table. Let's dive into how vacancy rates give you a strategic edge. Now, I would say most new landlords get this wrong. I can't tell you how many new clients call us and say something like, well, I need $1,800 a month because my mortgage is $1,500 and I want some cash flow. And every single time I tell them the same thing. The market will tell you what it wants. You don't get to decide. If your place is only worth $1,600 in rent and you're asking $1,800, it's going to sit. Simple as that. I had one owner who was adamant about getting $200 more than the comps, and the place sat empty for 2 months. That's $3,000 in lost revenue, all because he ignored market demand. And that's when I realized most investors aren't studying vacancy rates. They're pricing off emotion or math on a spreadsheet. So here's what you need to know. Number one, what is a vacancy rate? Let's go back to definitions. A vacancy rate is the percent of time a rental unit sits empty over a given year. There's a formula here. So if you have multiple properties, you can take your vacant units divided by the total units times 100. As an example, let's say you have a portfolio of 10 units, 2 vacant units out of 10 for easy math, 20% vacancy rate. So why do vacancy rates matter? Well, they indicate supply versus demand in your target market. High vacancy, you're in a tenant's market. Low vacancy, landlord market. Rent pressure, though, can rise. Okay. Now, I always say, look at your data sources. Again, we're here in Canada, so we're going to talk about CMHC, Canada Mortgage and Housing Corporation. The national average, at least in 2024, last year, was 2.2%, still below the historical 10-year average. You can talk about places like Calgary, 4.8% due to maybe new builds flooding the market. Toronto, 2.3%, slightly above average. Ottawa, high turnover from new completions. So my point is, check your local zone and not just the city average, because CMHC breaks it down by neighborhood in each city and the property type. So what influences vacancy rates? Location, 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 right? So that's one thing. So a desirable versus an undesirable area, maybe A class, B class, C class. The rent level, are you priced too high? Unit condition. An outdated unit in a better neighborhood is going to have longer vacancies. Amenities, this is super important. Are you offering in-suite laundry, parking? Is it pet friendly? These are things that lead to faster leases. And then seasonality. So many investors get this wrong. You know, spring, you got to think, who is moving in the spring? School is out, at least here in Canada, at the end of June. So our biggest and busiest market is July and August. But in the winter, things slow down. Again, think of a lease that ends December 31st, New Year's Eve. Who wants to move furniture in sub-zero temperatures, minus 40 here in Winnipeg, Manitoba, Canada, on New Year's Eve? Not too many people. So how many tenants, how many prospective leads are you going to have for January 1st move-in versus July? Maybe a third, maybe less. So that means in order for you to rent out those properties in January, you're going to have to lower your rent. And that's what it is. Okay, maybe you can compensate that by trying to sign a shorter term lease so that you renew with that tenant maybe in June or July or August. And you can entice them with this too, because in most markets, they have to agree to it as well. And then you have a year lease rolling over so that all of your rentals are rolling over in the summer and spring months. Now, how do vacancy rates affect rent pricing? Well, I just talked about economics 101, right? Supply and demand. A high vacancy rate is a tenant's market, which means tenants have options. They can go anywhere. So the landlords have to compete with price or incentives. Maybe you have to offer more bonuses. Maybe you have to include some utilities. Maybe you have to make it pet friendly when you've never had to, okay? You may need to drop the asking price just to stay competitive. But what happens if we're in a low vacancy rate? Well, that's a landlord's market. Again, supply and demand. If the tenants have fewer options, they're going to be sticking around longer, which means there are fewer vacancies coming in, which means you can raise the rent, maybe modestly, maybe a lot. I know right now at the time of this recording, our rents here have probably increased here again in Winnipeg, Manitoba, Canada. I'd probably say anecdotally, maybe 15% over the last year. Like the rents are getting pretty crazy here. I actually think it's a bit of a bubble and it's going to pop, but take advantage of it if you can. However, and I will say, however, if you're pre-purchase, do not, and I repeat, do not use the current rent right now, assuming that it's going to stay that way. Always be a little bit more conservative. And then if you can get that kind of rent right now, that's great. It's gravy, extra money. Don't make a purchasing decision on it, because if the markets change, you're going to be held with overpaying for a property and potentially always being negative cash flow. Now, again, with low vacancy rates, tenants are less likely to negotiate or even delay decisions. So you're going to find that there's lots of applicants. Things are flying off the shelf a lot faster. So enjoy it while it can. Now, vacancy math and why it pays to be competitive. And let's say your rent goal is $1,200 a month and you hold out for that number and you said vacant for a month. That's a $1,200 loss. You could have priced it at $1,100, rented it fast, and made up that difference over the lease. In the next year, that tenant might renew. No turnover, no repairs, and no extra showings. Now, that's time for you and money, or if you're using a property manager, that's extra tenant placement fees that you didn't have to pay for. And don't forget all of that, those turnover costs. I don't care how good the tenant's going to be, how well you or your property manager screened, there's always something that has to happen on a turnover. Okay, so that's a really quiet profit year. CMHC reports or data sources. Again, I have a lot of audience in the US. It's about 60% US, 40% in Canada. So CMHC reports up here in Canada. And then obviously in the US, you're going to look at your local market housing reports. But these reports are your friend. They're published biannually or annually for every major market. And they're going to show vacancy rates by postal or zip code, your average rents by unit type, market trends, up or down, rental pressure, and they're all free, okay? So use this data to coach your realtor and then also price your own listings with confidence. Now, my professional advice, and maybe you want to write this down, you want to price slightly below market rent. Now, let me give you my professional opinion. And why? And this comes from placing thousands and thousands of tenants over the last 2 decades. I think I checked my database the other day, 20,000 tenants. I've screened 20,000 tenants. So here's my advice. If you want great tenants, price your rent just slightly below the average. And here's why this works and why I recommend it. You want to attract better tenants that stay longer. A tenant who sees your unit as good value is more likely to stay longer, take care of the property, renew without haggling, and long-term tenants mean less turnover, less vacancy, and less wear and tear. The higher rent equals better tenant theory. There is this rule of, not rule of thumb. I keep hearing this from even my own clients. Well, Garret, what happens if I want to hold the rent higher because it's going to attract a better tenant that can afford it? You know what? I don't buy it. It's a popular idea. You know, if you charge a higher rent, quality high, I don't know. I think it's ridiculous. So who's renting at the top end of the market right now? Well, maybe people who can afford it, although if they're smart, why would they pay more when there's other rental properties out there? So I would say it could be people with poor credit who can't qualify to buy, people who shouldn't be renting that much, and sometimes, yes, people with cash-heavy side hustles, drug dealers. Now, there are great tenants, though, looking for value. Many excellent tenants are out there trying to save up for a home, pay down student debt, live slightly below their means. Those are your ideal tenants. They're stable, financially responsible, and value a good deal. So you want to use screening, not pricing, to filter applicants. Price doesn't determine tenant quality, your screening does. Run credit checks, check references, verify income and employment, and then use systems and scoring like the one we use internally. Relying on price to filter applicants, I'm sorry, it's lazy landlording. Lower rent equals a bigger pool of applicants, equals better and more to choose from, okay? When you want your rent maybe 50 to 100 bucks below average, you get more applications, you get to choose from this wider pool, and you control the outcome, not the tenant. So instead of 3 sketchy applications that you have to choose from and you're not sure and you're faced with yet another vacancy or a substandard tenant, you now have 12 solid ones and you can pick the best of the best that fit the property too. And that's how professionals run rental businesses. So to summarize this episode, vacancy rates are a key metric. Ignore them and your pricing strategy will fail. Let the market speak to you. Your job is to listen, adjust, and act quickly. And whether you're a first-time investor or managing dozens of doors, keeping tabs on vacancy helps you win long-term. So check the link in the show notes, grab our free Get Rent Ready in 3 days guide. And also what we're doing, I'm running a bunch of free webinars, tenant screening masterclass. That might be something you want to check out. And also look at your local vacancy rate. Okay, now's the time. It's spring, at least at the time of this recording. Go to those websites, the government sites, get informed before your next lease hits the market.